Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and with me, as always, is Ansgar the Hat Odinson.
Long time no see, folks.
And yeah, oh God, um, I swear I've actually been I was accused earlier of just you guys are just making shit up in order to keep streaming. I was like, no, I'm not. I got nothing to do with this, and I don't appreciate having to stream, 27, 28 hours a day.
Icarus has asked if we can make more shows. He doesn't have anything to watch, so
I don't know why he doesn't have anything to watch. We've been live for the last 20. Oh my
uh,
God. And we canceled. I mean, we canceled the Reds show. We're still trying to reschedule that, but just as well because it's not well. We had a couple things to fill with.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you just joining us, and I think it's nice to have like a scheduled stream on the air.
Yes, a show with a
Um,
theme and everything. It'll be
I
nice.
know it's like, well, and the theme isn't the end of the world. Well, maybe it will be by the time we're done, but we'll see. Um, so we do. I think probably everybody watching here by this point is going to be sort of a regular, and they're a subscriber, so they know we cover breaking news, and so we've been a little busy. But I think everybody here has done a spectacular job. Either Ansgar or I. Basically, we've been covering for each other. So when Ansgar is sleeping, I'm streaming, and when I'm sleeping, Ansgar is streaming, and
Welcome to the 24-hour
I
news cycle.
I know. Well, and we said right when this started, we're like, I think there's going to be a lot of breaking news next week, but I don't think we really. And Ansgar's like, we finished the last one. The missiles had stopped falling in the green zone, and we're like, okay, we're done. And Ansgar's like, I'm going to bed, and he was smart. He was just like, you know what? I'm actually gonna. I'm not even. I was like, so he unplugs the thing, and I was just like, you don't have to worry about it. It's not. It's done for the night. The Ayatollah has said no more attacks. We're good. And then Kitty calls me up and says a passenger plane is down outside of Tehran, a Ukrainian passenger plane. I was just like, oh, that was actually really well done. So that was clever. Yeah, you almost had me there. I was like, there's no way that happened. That was cute, Kitty. Thank you. I was like, you almost gave me a heart attack. I'm gonna go to bed. It's like, no, Nick. That actually happened. I was just like, no. And then she sent me the thing on locusts. I was like, "There's a locust invasion." I was like, "Okay, okay." And we're gonna have Sy Garte on tomorrow, and he's a Christian. So, at this point, I'm starting to consider converting. I've seen enough. I was just like, I'm okay. Wow. Um,
Well,
so
and which brings up a point. All of this has cost us a tremendous amount of coffee to keep us awake. So if you want to make sure that we still have coffee, you can become a patron. Links are in the
yeah.
description.
Oh,
Sorry, I
well,
had to.
no, no, but actually that works anyway. We have our patron hangout. We have all our patrons join us for a hangout. Kitty's there, I'm there, you're there, Dave is there. We're all there. We hang out. You can hang out with, and a number of our regular guests are patrons as well. A number of our regular guests show up. Um, they're a lot of fun. We also talk about future show ideas. We don't take any. Any sponsorships. Dollar Shave Club has just been banging on our doors to have us shill their products, and we don't do that. One of the reasons is we want to try to stay unbiased. Not that I'm totally concerned about breaking news in Dollar Shave Club, but you never know. And but what we do is we're supported by our patrons, by our subscribers. So if you want to like and subscribe, and if you want to retweet our stuff and pass it out if you like it. You support this channel, it helps. It helps to retweet and pass this stuff along. So, and if you become a patron, you get to hang out with us. Hat will be there. Hat is always there as well. So is Chair on occasion. And yep. So I hope you guys will join us for that. We are going to keep up with the breaking news as much as we're starting to get a little strung out, I think.
Although it seems like it's winding down, fortunately.
I hope so, and and we're also hopefully going to get ProLib on and maybe try to do a deep dive on sort of everything that's happened in the last 4 or 5 days, because it's some pretty extensive stuff. So, but for today we have a scheduled show, and we're going to be discussing Trump and the Christian right, and both sort of evangelical and Christian support for Trump? Is it something that morally they can do? Does it conflict with, or is it concordant with their values? And we have on man, I love this guy. I've been on a couple of streams with him, but I've been also seeing him around. We have on Dr. Sy Garte. Dr. Garte, how are you?
Very well. Thanks for having me.
Our genuine pleasure. We've been banging down his door like.
Yeah.
So, would you do us a favor? And before we even get going, who are you? Tell us a bit about yourself. What do you do? What's your degree in, and about your Christianity, and just sort of what you've been doing.
Okay. Yeah. My PhD is in biochemistry. I got that many decades ago. I won't say how many. I've been a professor in several universities. I then went to NIH, where I was a division director in the grant review branch. So I know an awful lot about peer review and grants. And then I retired. Once I retired, which was about 4 years ago, I started, I should say that I also began life as an atheist. I was born into a very strong atheist family and remained an atheist most of my life. Came to Christianity much later, and the whole process that I did that is documented in my book, which I'm holding up here, and I believe there's a link somewhere down there if you're interested in it.
Yeah, I've put the link in the chat.
Yeah, in the chat. Okay, and the subtitle says "A Scientist's Journey from Atheism to Faith," which pretty much tells what the book's about. So part of that journey involved my scientific activity, and again, I'm not going to discuss that today. So I did become a very devout Christian. I'm now devoting most of my time to that, and that includes being the editor-in-chief of an online magazine called God and Nature, which is put out by the American Scientific Affiliation, which is a nationwide, also includes Canada, association of Christians who are scientists. There's about 3,000 members, and we're pretty active.
And can I interrupt real quickly? So we have our producer and community director in the live chat. We also have mods. If somebody could drop a link, I think we just dropped a link to his book, but if someone could drop a link to, and we'll have these in the description as well, so that they just stay with the video. But if somebody could drop a link to, could you repeat that? The website or the organization you said, the online organization?
Yeah, it's the American Scientific Affiliation. It's ASA. I believe the website is asa3.org.
So if someone could drop a link to that in our chat, and we'll have that in the description later for people who are seeing this video later. So thank you. Please continue. I apologize for interrupting.
Appreciate that. Yeah. And I'm very active in my church. I'm a member of the United Methodist Church, and that may come up in our discussion. A lot going on in the United Methodist Church at the moment. I also, because of my book, and the publicist and my publisher's publicist had sent something to Christianity Today about a few weeks ago, and they responded about the book, and they responded by inviting me to contribute an article on my testimony to the magazine, and I agreed to do it, and I just sent it out. It should come out in a month or two.
Oh, nice.
And then and that got me interested in Christianity Today. I've read it before, but I then subscribed to it, and lo and behold, the editorial came out last week, which basically said that the editor, the editorial position of the magazine, which was founded by Billy Graham and is an evangelical magazine, basically said that Trump should be removed from office, which sent shockwaves through the Christian world, evangelical in particular. And I guess Nick and I were talking about this, and we agreed it might be something that would be worth discussing on this show.
So, and actually, the other well, no, okay. Sorry, yeah, I wanted to. There was one other thing I think I wanted to put up, but I forgot it. You're also one of the only other people. I guess now that the circle's getting larger, but you're one of the other people who has also debated Kent Hovind.
Oh yeah, well that's a long list.
It is. The list is getting longer, but I don't know. I have a bit of an affinity for guests who come on who have gone through that.
Ordeal.
Well, it's an interesting challenge, and you and I got to talk about it a
I
little
like
bit.
the
But
word
it's
ordeal. Like
ordeal,
calling it
yeah.
the Kent Hovind ordeal. That is, I like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Well, I've already told you, Nick, I think that you did one of the best jobs. I mean, there are several people who did great with Kent. Inspiring Philosophy, Michael Jones had a wonderful, I think really, was the winner of all of us. I didn't feel I did very well at all, so I don't like to bring it up.
So sorry. Okay, I'll stay out of that one.
Yeah.
All right, and then and the wow, I know that there was another. I'm sorry, I'm like running on 2 hours of sleep. I have no idea why Ansgar's at least is. So I'll keep trying to write down a bit better and keep it.
Well, I've also
Oh,
appeared on the old Non Sequitur show many times. The original Non Sequitur show. We of course don't know what's going to come from there, but
True.
Ansgar, have you heard of that one?
No, total mystery to me.
Non
I don't know what he's
Sequitur show.
talking about.
Yeah, it's faded into the past history by now, right?
Uh,
Now,
Well,
what?
and
Yeah,
I did, when you're do me a favor, please, and when your article in Christian Times comes out, let me know, and we will let our audience know. We'll just do a thing and remind them
be
that that
happy to.
article is out. So
oh,
I'll be happy.
don't drop that one on us.
I
And
just
then
want to say, I just want to add one last thing, which I feel
please.
is my most important claim to fame, and which very few people know, is that speaking of the Non Sequitur show, I am the proud winner of the Golden Nun. Right? They used to give out this awards, the Golden Nun, for the best Christian debater. And
that's
remember, this is
awesome.
an atheist show, right? So my comment was, I'm not sure that's such a great honor. It's kind of like being voted the best dog by a bunch of cats, right? I mean, not sure what that really means. But anyway, I am the proud recipient of that show. And I thank Steve McRae a lot for that honor.
That's awesome.
And now I'm done.
Well, so one of the things that we covered that article when it came out, but it was
Yeah.
very hard for us to judge the effect that had on the Christian community. We assumed it probably had an effect. I mean, and if I recall that article, they also said that Trump had betrayed the values of Billy Graham, and people who were supporting him were betraying the values that they were trying to espouse on Christianity today. So I think just to give an overarch of what I'd like to cover, I'd like to talk about a bit about what the repercussions were, what the discussion's been, and what your views are on both that editorial and that topic in general. So if that works for you, yeah, I'd like to start with what were the repercussions of that article?
Well, they were interesting, and they're not over yet. The What many people have said is that what that editorial did was bring out to the public, to public knowledge, and that the public, including everybody, including other Christians, that the presumption that American evangelicals or American Christianity as a whole, the presumption that that is a group of people who are uniform and homogeneous in their support of the president is not true. There's
No.
clearly a strain of uh, sort of anti-Trump feeling among uh, a large segment of Christians for sure, and some segment, we don't know the size, of evangelicals in particular. And uh, right after that, I saw some evidence that this editorial had provided some cover for a few other people. A very conservative Christian apologist named Dr. Michael Brown, who is very well known as an apologist online and speaking, came out with an interesting tweet saying, I think actually it wasn't a tweet, it was a blog post, saying that he was holding Trump accountable for a particular issue where Trump, the president, had made some derogatory comment related to the widow of someone who had died, a serviceman, and I wasn't even aware of that. It seemed like a small point, but the fact that Dr. Brown, who is quite conservative and definitely a supporter of Trump, and he said he still does support Trump, but the fact that he was able to criticize him in that way was, again, something new. And there have been other cases of people, I can't think of those right now related specifically to this article, because remember, it's only been about a week or so. But there have been other examples of people who I would have thought would have been more outraged by the editorial actually expressing some support. And statistically, it appears, and I have to give credit to my wife for this, she found this, that a lot of people did cancel their subscriptions to Christianity Today, but apparently 3 times as many opened up new subscriptions.
Really?
So now, whether that's going to remain, whether that we're only seeing the beginning of that, we're not sure, but it's certainly not going to sink the newspaper and the magazine. And of course, the president's comment saying that this is a progressive, I don't know, left wing, it's kind of goes along with a lot of his other comments. So it's significant. It's very significant. And I think what it really illustrates, and this is the point, if anything, if nothing else, I'd really like to get across, is that I feel it's very important that whenever people talk about, quote, Christians, they bear in mind, and this is something that everyone knows, of course, that that's not a homogeneous group. Okay, it's not people who all share political views, social views, name an issue. There are exceptions to anything that you would consider the standard Christian view. One of my favorite examples is one of the most active people, scientists, in pursuit of doing something about climate change. Her name is Catherine Hayhoe. She's an amazing, I don't know if you can get her, but she's an amazing speaker. I've heard her speak many times. And she's an evangelical Christian. She's a member of the ASA. She's spoken to the ASA meetings several times. And she is a fervent supporter of the reality of climate change and the need for Christians to exercise their responsibility to do creation care and to help, move the ball forward whenever possible. Now, we tend to think of the typical evangelical, especially white evangelical Christian community as very conservative, part of the Christian right. And statistically, I guess that's true, but it's a very, very broad group of folks. I'm never really quite sure what it means to be an evangelical, but on some definitions, I am one. Francis Collins, the head of NIH, who is one of the leading voices in the whole science and faith discussion, considers himself an evangelical. He talks about we evangelicals. I've heard him say that many times. Mm-hmm. So you can use various definitions of it. But then if we go, and hopefully we'll get into a little more detail about this whole situation of evangelicals supporting Donald Trump, a man who's been married twice, who openly talks about infidelity as something, that he does, that he's happy to do, etc.
That's where I kind of wanted to go next is where did initially the large amount of support that comes from the Christian right come from? What was it that drew them to this man?
That's a very good question. And what it was not was his moral viewpoint. To put this in perspective, remember that Mark Galli, the man who wrote this editorial, the editor-in-chief, is by no means a flaming liberal. He is a conservative. He holds to conservative Christian values, and he quotes what Christianity Today wrote in their editorials about back in the 1990s, and it says the reason many are not shocked. This is from the editorial. That this is, I'm sorry. The reason that many are not shocked about this is that this president has dumbed down the idea of morality in his administration. And what he's talking about is Bill Clinton and the impeachment of Bill Clinton. So, in other words, the idea was that we need to have leaders who exhibit the kind of morality that Christianity today and evangelical Christianity stands for. And what the current editorial is saying is, just as we came out against the immorality of Bill Clinton, we certainly should be coming out against the immorality of this president. Now, that's not the key thing of the editorial. The key thing in the editorial is that the facts brought out in the House impeachment process show that the president violated the law and, should be removed. But there's a lot of discussion on the moral issues. Now, to answer your question, Ansgar, why did evangelicals ever come to Trump in the first place, is, I think, almost entirely political and not religious and not moral.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that as a candidate, Trump was very much involved in some of the issues that very conservative people, which happen to also include many evangelicals, agree with. And they continue to support him because among his issues are, or at least evangelicals believe, you never really know what Trump believes, but evangelicals believe, and many right-wing or conservative people in this country believe, that the president is strongly opposed to abortion, is very much in favor of religious liberty, meaning, not to think about taxing churches or to repress any expression of religious expressions. And so these and other political issues, which could even go as far as, very unchristian values, such as, excluding groups of people, such as immigrants and people who are not, quote, like us. Now, that is, and I think the other aspect of the situation now, and the reason that Trump's support is still strong among Christians, is that on the opposition, we find expressions that are not terribly consonant with many Christians believe, and that could include the very famous statement by Beto O'Rourke just before he dropped out, saying that any church that does not welcome LGBTQ people should lose their tax exemption. And,
which I thought was a disastrous thing to say, to be quite honest.
It ended his candidacy. It was, I agree, it was completely disastrous and whatever. But when a Democrat says something like that, or when some of the other Democrats, and not necessarily only the candidates, but, when Omar makes her comments, they're obviously brought into, the media and used to pump up support for the president. Right. So I think that concluding that this whole thing, what we're really talking about is a very complex situation wherein white evangelicals tend to be conservative politically, and political conservatives at this moment, in the last year or two, have been very supportive of Trump. And so there's that. But the point I really want to make is that if you look at the details of who supported Trump and how and why, it's a little more complex. And one of the things, there's a Washington Post article from 2016, from March in 2016, when the Republican primary was in full blast. And the first line of this article says, one of the most surprising parts of the 2016 election has been evangelical Christian support for Donald Trump. And it goes on and talks about that. But it turns out that they looked at the characteristics of these people who were pro-Trump during that period. And remember, that was still, Ted Cruz was still in the race. There was other conservative choices. And what they found out was something quite interesting. And I'll quote, Trump does best among evangelicals with one key trait. They don't go to church. Now that sounds strange, but it is actually makes some sense. So in other words, it turns out that a lot of people identify as evangelicals who actually are not really evangelical. They don't go to church very often. If they do, their churches may not even be, or usually are not mainline churches. They're often, independent churches with their own, elected pastor who says whatever he wants. I don't have to tell you about some of the crazy far out churches that exist in this country and some of their crazy pastors. Now, obviously, most evangelicals do go to church and are, devout, and they try to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. Many of these people are very upset about some of the policies that have gone on, especially related to immigration. But it's interesting that during the primary season, the number of Trump supporters among the evangelicals happened to be that group that just didn't go to church much or ever.
So we got two things. We have interesting discussion in the live chat. I think somebody had said that when we went live, we still had Misha Griffin's name under yours, which actually which begged the question that a lot of people have been asking: if we put the two of you in a box, do we know who's actually in the box until we open the cover?
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's been an ongoing discussion here, and nobody really knows. I think Dr. Griffith is in the live chat, and she is curious as to the quantum states and uncertainty as to who would be in the box when we open the cover. But we'll look at. Oh, and she actually refined that joke. I said the Schrodinger joke, but I think I won't get into that right now. So I do have. I would like to know. There's a couple of questions that I'd like to hit, but one of them: what is your opinion about that article and about Christians supporting Trump, which I understand again is far more complex because Christians aren't a single block and different ones have different beliefs. But what are your personal views on that?
Right.
Issue?
So I forgot to say this at the opening, but this is a good time to say it. First, let me say hi to Misha. I'm glad you're here. I usually come online to talk about biology, science and faith. I have never spoken, nor have I ever tweeted about politics. And that's for good reason. I really hate politics. I always have. Well, not always, but there was when I was in college, I had an experience that turned me away from politics forever. And nothing has happened to change my view. I do vote and I do have political views. I don't like talking about them very much. And the reason is obvious. It's a distraction from what I think is really important, which is my faith in God, my hope in Jesus Christ, and my worldview as a scientist. All of those things can be poisoned by politics. I've written and published things about, the Lysenko affair and how we have to avoid that. I was an environmental scientist, and I was therefore heavily involved in the intersection between politics and science when it came to the environment. And I even published an editorial in a journal, Environmental Health Perspectives, where I argued strongly for the idea of keeping politics out of science, including environmental science. So that said, your question is I'm not going to answer it completely, but I think you deserve some kind of answer. I am not a supporter of Donald Trump. I never was. I'm not going to talk about my feelings about the impeachment or other things. I will say that like many, I was very disappointed by the approach of certain evangelical leaders. Franklin Graham, Billy Graham's son, comes to mind, and a few others who have been very supportive of Trump, using the point that despite all his moral failings, he is doing good things for Christianity in America. And that's not a Christian. that doesn't work in the Gospels. You don't have that kind of the end justifies the means. So I'm disappointed at that. Obviously, like many, I think that the president is unprepared in many ways, and I think we can pray thanks to Lord watching over us, in my own view, that things have not gone worse than they have. Now, of course,
that's actually okay. You may convince me on that one. That's we elect a tangerine, and 4 years later, we're still alive.
We're still alive. Now, I was wondering about that a few hours ago, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying, 8 days into the new year, I'm already going, make it stop.
Well, I mean, considering I went to bed thinking we were, on the brink of a real disaster, apparently we're walking back from that. So I give both the president and especially his advisors, who I'm sure have been very active, a lot of credit, because I was predicting much worse in my own pessimistic view. But so it's not an all or nothing case.
Let me interrupt and just let you know. So I am concerned about how the media is portraying recent events, and I discovered there is a show on YouTube that is very good, in my opinion, on striking a balance and getting its viewers informed about these kinds of things. So if you have questions in the future about these kinds of just huge concerns, Ansgar, do you know what the show was? I don't remember.
It's something about clocks or
It's a clock show.
chronology or in time. There it is. Yeah.
There was a guy with a really insane hat in the show, but you can always watch that and you would be completely and perfectly up to date with everything you need to know. And it won't be apocalyptic and we're all going to die, but it will, I think it covers it well. And it has on some great guests to talk about these kinds of things.
Just every now and then with an exception, but usually
with an exception every now and then. Yeah. All right. So I think that's thank you for the answer. We also had a few other, and I do want to get back to the main topic. We had a question that I've always been interested in, and I think this is, we're looking to have on Martin Joss, who is a Anglican bishop, and he wants to talk a lot about the no true Scotsman fallacy and how that applies to Christianity. And it's sort of what I think you're talking about you can't easily say all Christians and XYZ. It becomes very difficult. But I have noticed there is a very strong correlation between, I consider global warming to be probably the single biggest issue that we are facing in all respects. And there is a very strong correlation between level of religiosity and denial that global warming is an issue, either because they deny the science, or I think it's been three members of Congress who have said that, or intimated in one way or another, that global warming is not an issue because God will take care of it. And I liked how you framed it, which is that we are, I think, stewards of his creation. And so we're really not permitted to think that way. Now, I think a lot of them argue different scriptures that say that, if we are, or we're in the end times, and so on and so forth. So I do think it's very difficult to keep politics out of religion out of this, obviously, because your beliefs are going to inform how you look at things. But may I ask your opinion about those kinds of, and especially like U.S. senators who do say, look, God, if global warming is real, we don't need to worry about it. God will save us.
Well, I think, like many issues, this is a question of education, and I think that many surveys that look at religiosity don't take sufficient account of a confounder, which is the educational level of the people they're talking to. So I think that, and this is why people like Catherine Hayhoe are so important, because she is speaking primarily to Christian audiences, and she's not alone. There are many others who are doing the same thing and talking about the whole idea of creation care and how this is a critical part of our faith. And that the science is very clear. There's not a lot of controversy about what's happening in the poles. I mean, global warming isn't happening outside my house right now, but there's a little bit of snow. But that's not the issue. The issue is it's happening at the poles, and it's happening obviously in Australia. It's happening in places, and you guys did a great thing about the Australian fires. That's how I first learned about it. A little plug for your breaking news. I didn't see a thing about the Australian fires until I was watching you guys, and there it was.
That is a global story. I think the koala habitat is gone. They are functionally extinct. Now they can be brought back. The animals have been saved, and they can be reintroduced once the habitat returns. But as of this moment, they are functionally extinct, and it's the fires are insane. And it's affecting everybody. But so we're a little surprised that U.S. News isn't covering it, and that's one of the things.
It's crazy, and so what we need is a lot more outreach, and what we need is good scientific information, not only about the existence of the problem, which I think is easy to find. What we don't have much about is scientific information about what we can actually do. And there's a lot of misinformation. And that's one of the things that I'm kind of trying to devote my retirement to, along with other things, is helping people see what is good scientific information and what is not so good. Okay. So a lot of people will seize on, because it's such a huge topic, as you said, Nick. People will seize on this topic and use whatever their particular agenda might be and say, well, this is bad for global warming. There are jokes about that. So, right. So I think that's, you asked the question, what do I think about this issue related to fundamentalist Christians or evangelicals? And I think the answer is simply education. And it's the same situation that we have with evolution, which I'm very involved in. My view is that, and I'm glad to say that many young Earth creationists agree with me, in the sense that the whole question of evolution being true or not is not a salvation issue. It's an issue of interpretation of the Bible. And so, nobody calls each other heretics if we don't agree. And I'm not alone. There are much better spokespeople around who are both scientists and theologians, who have made very strong cases for the fact that evolution is actually not only consistent with biblical truth, but probably is what the Bible actually is pointing to. And I don't get into that because it's a whole other field. But what that requires is education, and that's why I tried to debate with Kent Owen, and tried my best with very little success to move him just an inch or two. That didn't happen.
Well, nobody's going to move him an inch.
He's
He's
impervious.
got a huge. That's sort of like. In fact, I could ask. That is a question. This is a tangential topic, but I think very important. So, what did you think about? Ansgar, who was it at the Creationist? Who Bill Nye.
Bill Nye, yeah, and
yes. What did you think about him doing that debate at the Creationist Museum?
Bill Nye and Ken Ham debate?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Well, to tell you the truth, I thought the whole idea of having the debate was really terrible. Mm-hmm. You have an atheist scientist debating a Christian young Earth creationist. They have no common ground whatsoever.
That's a fair statement.
And many people have said that there was a third voice missing, and it's a large voice, and it's growing larger. and that is the voice of Christians who accept evolution. And in fact, it's not a little minority; it's the majority of worldwide Christians, and it's even the majority of American Christians, and it's even a large slice of evangelical Christians, over 35%. So this whole idea that Christians don't like evolution and atheists and evolution is an atheist thing, no, that's a myth, and that's the first thing that we're trying to counter.
Right.
If that debate were ever held again, it should include Francis Collins or Dennis Lamoureux or any of the really strong voices who are Christians and who, absolutely accept evolution and mainstream science. And so I found that debate terribly frustrating to
Well,
watch.
so perhaps would still two voices, but instead of having an atheist do it, which might sort of poison the well to the audience, having a strong, well-informed Christian doing it might have been more true. Because I think that's a good argument. I hadn't
Well, it would
thought of
be a
that.
good idea. I know Hugh Ross, who is a old Earth creationist and an astrophysicist, brilliant scientist, great guy. You really might think about having him on some point. He debated it was actually a discussion with Ken Ham. It did not go well. Ken Ham is, I don't want to say too much. He's not a very friendly person. Kent Hovind is a little different. He's at least a reasonable guy, and
Can we walk back the word reasonable? He's affable. He's
he's
approachable.
affable.
Maybe.
Put it that way.
I'd really
He's
rather
affable.
not use the word reasonable. I don't want to.
Yeah, okay. Reasonable is the wrong word. You're right. But Ken Ham is slightly different, and I don't think that debate would ever happen. I think he's happy to debate atheists because he can attack them for their atheism to his Christian crowd. He
So
doesn't talk much about science. He doesn't know almost anything about science, so that's almost never an issue.
Yeah. Well, it's an issue because he doesn't speak the language well enough to know what the. But so who was the guy you said maybe we could have on that actually does debates? Because we've been looking to do debates, and I actually did want to bring you on for a debate at some point if you're up for it. I wanted to debate you on, and this may be sensitive, and we've had Dr. Griffith has been kind of iffy on it, but we did want to debate whether it is morally permissible to put pineapple on a pizza, and she has been in the positive of that side. Yeah, I think if we could maybe get you, this is I think
I would love to do that. I would love that. Would be my favorite show ever.
Okay.
I can prove by a whole series of peer-reviewed publications in journals such as Nature and PNAS, etc., that pineapple is not only immoral but scientifically prohibited on pizza.
You are on our side. This is great.
I love you.
Oh, I'd love to do that.
Our team is building. I do think Landon Knoll has said he may be on the other side on this one, so we could use some support. So
I'll take on anybody on that one.
Perfect. Yes. We are golden. So what was the name of the guy that you said does the Christian
I'm a Brooklyn
debate
guy. I know about pizza.
There you go. There you go.
The guy who does the Christian debate. We are looking for debates, and we have like a debate structure, but we haven't had a chance to do one yet. We've got like 8 or 9 people lined up for debates, but none of them cross each other on topics. So we've got 8 or 9 people. We've got oh my God, my brain is what Jim Majors is lined up for a debate. We've got a lot of people who are there like, oh, we're ready to debate, but we haven't found someone for the other side. It's really hard. So
I know Jim, and he's great. He's a very strong voice. I don't know if I've ever debated him. He'd have to tell you. We've been on streams together, I think.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
The people I mentioned were Hugh Ross, who is an old Earth creationist. He's the director of something called Reasons to Believe, which is a Christian apologetics group that talks about old Earth creationism. They have a model for how God operates in the world, and he's not pro-evolution necessarily, although he's somewhat open. but he is a astrophysicist, and he knows all the science about why the Earth is not 6,000 years old. So he'd be
Awesome.
great. I also mentioned Dennis Lamar, who's a friend of mine, has a PhD in evolutionary biology and a PhD in Christian theology, and he is a very articulate and forceful defender of evolution as an evangelical Christian. And he teaches a course in science and religion, and he's very famous within the science and faith community.
We're going to use you for your. We're totally just. We are not above like using you just for your like contacts. I'll get in touch with you on Twitter, and we'll see if
Yeah,
maybe
no
you
problem.
can help us
I can
get
give you a list of people, right?
Oh, wonderful. All right, thank you. I'm sorry, Ansgar. I think I cut you off there. If there was a.
Oh no. First of all, we do have. I'll read it in just a second. We do actually have a donation that came through Streamlabs. We appreciate those a great deal because Google doesn't take 30% of those. Not that we don't appreciate the super chats, we do, but donations through Streamlabs are very much appreciated, and we will read that in just a moment. But I had a question. Me being in the sort of atheist sphere that I am, one of the large kind of cultural ideas seems to be that the evangelical right or the Christian right or whatever you want to call them are very much against science, and more importantly that Christianity itself is very much in opposition to science. Like sort of the idea is that science leads you to atheism, you know what I mean, proper science education. I would, before we kind of move on, since education is so important to this topic, obviously, I'd like to kind of get your thoughts on that.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that. That's the subject of my book. It's the target audience for my book, and not just my book. There are many other Christians and scientists who are writing on this topic. And I'll just start with the history. I mean, historically, modern experimental science was an outgrowth of Christian theology, and many, not almost all, of the original experimental scientists were Christians, and some of them very devout. Robert Boyle, who founded chemistry, was a very devout Christian. So was Michael Faraday of the, of electricity fame, James Clerk Maxwell, on and on. Pasteur, I have a whole list on my blog somewhere. All the way into the 20th century. I mean, there've been something like 20 or 30 Nobel Prize winners who were devout Christians. I know a couple of them in various sciences. So the idea that atheism and science are together, and Christianity and anti-science are together, is just it's a bad meme, and there are two groups who are responsible for it, who tend to agree on a lot of things, by the way. And those two groups are very fundamentalist Christians who hate the idea of anything other than a young earth creation story, and the other group are the new atheists. Mm-hmm. And they both agree that the Bible, as written in the English translation of several other languages, is, quote, the literal inerrant view of God. And of course, literal is a mistake because they don't take the Bible literally either, but their interpretation of what the Bible says is almost precisely identical to what Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, etc., say the Bible says.
Right.
So the two ends are, and they feed off each other too, I think, because
they love each other. Oh,
they're like besties almost in some regards.
This is why Ken Ham debated Bill Nye, and would never debate, and hated debating or even talking to Hugh Ross, and would not debate, Francis Collins or anyone who's a Christian. And it's because they can agree on a lot of things, all of including the idea that science and faith are diametrically opposed, and so this meme has spread from two ends into the culture. And I actually consider at this point my life's purpose is to join a large group of folks who are fighting against that idea. It's simply untrue historically. It's let's remember that young Earth creationism is a very new phenomenon in Christianity. It started with Ellen White and George McCready Price, who were Seventh Day Adventists. It came from a vision that Ellen White had. This is in the late 19th century, and then it eventually spread to Southern Baptists. And the anti-evolution thing began in the 1960s with the Genesis flood. So we're talking about this is not established Christian tradition.
Right.
This is a newfound idea. And so there are many of these things that need to be brought out and educate, and people need to be educated. And you know the quote that I often use is because a lot of young people, a lot of students, a lot of people now in college who came from very traditional Christian families, very fundamental Christian families, and then go to college and learn about real biology, and they're told by both sides, choose one or the other.
Right.
Some of them will choose atheism and will choose, biology. And as a Christian, and as many of us agree, this is a real tragedy, and it's unnecessary because there is no conflict between the two. There's no conflict between, the fact that we're sinners and we've been saved by the presence of Jesus Christ and his sacrifice on the cross. That is what Christians believe. And this question of what a day means in Genesis, and
Right.
what does it mean, the kind and all that stuff, that's irrelevant. And we have good answers for that, which are not at all contradictory to our scientific knowledge.
Well, I'd like
So
to say as
what I like.
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say
I was
as
just
an atheist,
saying that
dancing.
what I like to say is that if you're a student and you're confused about your faith, do the following: go to church and study science. Do both, because that's not gonna hurt you. That's gonna help you.
I was gonna say I do need to read this donation. I was gonna say though, as an atheist, who's very passionate about science, I would much rather, whether or not I agree with it, I would much rather promote the idea that faith and science are in no way in conflict, because the idea, promoting that idea, makes it seem as though you have to leave science to keep your faith.
Exactly. And let me just before you read that, I want to plug another very important organization, if I may, which is called BioLogos. It was started by Francis Collins just before he became the director of NIH, and then he had to leave. It's got a fantastic website. They have a great podcast. You can find it at biologos.org. And their entire mission is to promote what we call evolutionary creationism, which means, you hold to evolution, and you hold to the idea that God is the creator of everything, and you hold to mainstream science. And there's some wonderful resources on that website for students, for homeschoolers, for pastors, for atheists, for the lay public. I strongly recommend. I even have an article up there somewhere if you can find it. But there are. It's been around for quite a while. It's been around for over 10 years, and it's going strong.
So, do you have that super chat? And then I got a couple questions, but I'd love to hear what the.
Mr. President 99 for $3 said, it is climate change, not global warming. Warming is a side effect of this shit we are responsible for. It most likely will be the biggest extinction event right after the big old meteor crash back in the good old times.
Well, I'm not sure that that's fair to call Trump's election a meteor crash, but yes, it has been catastrophic.
But we're not unbiased in time.
No, we're not. This is a completely unbiased show. We are neutral in all anti-Trump respects.
Oh, terrible.
So I had a couple observations. I don't know if you know who GM Skeptic is, but he's
Yes, I do.
he's a young guy. I love him. I think he's great. But he actually reflects that story that you're talking about because he grew up evangelical, and when he first had an astronomy class, he's like, "No, this is not right." He goes, "Guys, you're not understanding. The Bible says all of this is wrong," and it had been framed to him that way. And once he started understanding it, there was no middle ground. He couldn't hold both views because he had been brought up in that. So I just find that interesting. And GM Skeptic is an extraordinarily powerful rising force in new atheism, and I think he's going to even exceed Hitchens if he keeps going. I think he's going to keep going, and it came as a direct result of what you're talking about. But we had a question in the live chat relating to that, which I think is important because I've been thinking about it. I have more atheists blocked. I'm essentially a new atheist. I like that title and I hold that one. But I have more atheists blocked than theists by probably 3 or even 5 to 1. And the reason is I'm really happy to talk and have a good conversation with any theist. But atheists really get upset because they say, wait a minute, you're not against, and I'm not against God beliefs. I'm against when those beliefs are somehow imposed on other people and forced through politics. If it stays out of politics, and I'm really fine with any of those theistic beliefs. And I get hammered by atheists who say, nope, 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 it all has to be gone. It's all irrational. You can't, and that they are diametrically opposed. Do you find that you have more difficulties from other evangelicals who say you are too moderate? You can't be saying the things that you're saying. Has that experience been the same to you? How do you get much pushback from, quote, your own side?
That's a great question, Nick. And the surprising answer is no. And that surprises me. I know that I have had 2 followers on Twitter out of 15,500 stop following me because of my views on evolution. I know that I have at least 100 strongly yet believing folks on Twitter who continue to follow me. And I'm surprised at that, but very happy about it, because what I think it means is that, with a few exceptions, of course, it signifies to me that although the disagreements can be fierce, there is a recognition that what we as Christians have in common, which is the belief in Jesus Christ, it supersedes those disagreements. Now that's not always true, and this is not a good survey because it's my own Twitter following. And, there's some bias there, and
Sample
I do know
size of 1, but
absolutely.
Yes.
And I do know that there are churches, and there's certainly cases of, for example, of faculty, of pastors who've been let go from churches which have a very strong evangelical bias. And so, but you asked me about me, so I'm answering, honestly about my own experience. I've also never experienced direct antagonism from atheists when I was in my science career. In other words, people have talked about, academic science, which I was in, both in academia and in government, as being very anti-Christian, and I never experienced that either. So again, I'm a lucky guy. I have not had that kind of backbiting by, as you said, one's own. I haven't experienced that, and I, as I said, I may just be lucky. I will say one thing, though, and you can relate to this. And there is a lot of internal difference among Christians, and we know that because of the number of the denominations that exist. We're about to see a new one form out of my own denomination, which is United Methodist Church. That's about to split, and there will be a new denomination coming out. So unity is not strong among Christians. However, I am really surprised at, and this is a topic we may not want to get into, this is another subject, but I am really surprised, since you brought it up, at the incredible animosity and almost vitriolic hatred that I see several atheists expressing towards each other online. And, we
It
all know
gets
what we're
ugly.
talking about. We don't want to get into that. But I'm staggered by it. I don't understand it. Remember, I started as an atheist. I considered myself a secular humanist, and this simply wouldn't have happened 30 years ago. I mean, it was just, inconceivable for people
There
who
was
valued reason,
yeah.
valued, you know what I'm saying.
There was a big
So,
event that fractured sort of the atheist, what you might call the
right,
atheist community, some time ago, and it's been
sure.
rippling ever since.
I know. I'm aware of it. I was following it at the time. I mean,
Right.
starting with Gamergate and all that,
Oh yeah,
and the split with
Elevator Gate, yeah.
right. Oh yeah, that's right. Even that
Hmm.
goes even further. So yeah. Anyway, so I'm not surprised at your experience, Nick. And as if I were an atheist now, and maybe GM skeptic, let me just say about GM skeptic, his experience is not unique. In fact, it's the norm. Almost all the really strong atheist apologists, and I don't know what else to call them because that's what they are. But almost all of them came from evangelical backgrounds. I'm thinking of Paul Oja,
That's right.
Dillahunty,
Mm.
Aaron Ra, maybe a little less with Aaron, but uh,
Well, yeah, but still
many of them,
strong. Yeah, yeah.
No.
many of them have come from that and rejected it, and I can't blame them. I mean, I would reject. I was very lucky. I never was exposed to it. I was exposed to pure distilled atheism, in a very
Right.
left wing view. And so for me, I rejected my upbringing too. I rejected the religion I was brought up in, which was that kind of militant, dogmatic atheism.
So
And so, yeah, I was lucky. If I might have gone the same route if I'd been brought up in with things that made no sense in terms of science.
so I have one sort of question before we start wrapping up. So to bring this back to Trump and the relationship with the right. So you've quoted some reasons why it is, not morally justified under the principles to support Trump. But what I want to know is, does that mean that um someone, let's say an atheist were to be running for president, would that mean that a Christian would be morally unjustified in supporting them?
Wow, that's an interesting question, and you know what? I don't know the answer. I don't think I can answer that. I would have to think about it a bit. I don't. That's a good question, though. I
Mm.
mean,
I
it's
mean, because it
interesting
gets
that
to
no
the
one.
I
Sorry.
will ask
I,
it because it gets to the heart of it. It's, do they have to
Yeah.
be espousing your core values for you to be morally justified in supporting them?
Oh boy. Yeah. That. I
you haven't
mean.
been watching the show, have you? Well, our general policy, and this holds to our own values and the integrity that we try to espouse on the show, is if you don't have an answer, just make it up.
Right, right. No, you guys don't do that, and I've never done that. I mean, uh, you know, if Misha's still listening, she's a historian of science, and anyone else who's in the sciences who may be around knows that the most important words a scientist can speak is, I don't know. Good
Yeah.
question.
Well, I
That's how we
would
do
love
science.
to, at some point, if you have a time to pontificate.
I need to think about that.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I mean, in my own head, I don't really know, what
Hmm.
the answer would be. I don't know how if somebody declared I'm an atheist and I'm running for president, I guess it would depend what their platform was in terms of, how did they feel about churches? Would they
Hmm.
be, like Stenger or
Right.
Harris or
So,
they just simply, I mean, my version of atheism was I didn't believe in God and I never talked about it. I didn't care.
but then wouldn't the people who voted for Trump because he politically aligns on a couple of things that they align with, wouldn't that be a moral justification?
Well, I don't see it as a moral justification. Remember
Fair
that
enough.
Donald Trump
Hmm.
has never been an outspoken Christian,
Hmm.
not just evangelical. He's not someone, I mean, he's actually the first president who you don't see in church.
Right.
I mean, Obama went to church. Hillary Clinton was a very strong member of my denomination, United Methodist. I mean, in some ways, Donald Trump is closest to your scenario
Right.
Well, and
of anyone you've ever
I'm
had.
reasonably sure that, I mean, I don't know that he's an atheist, but I think
No,
he's
I don't.
probably closer to deist than a
Maybe.
Christian. And he isn't able to quote the Bible in any meaning. I mean, when he was asked what's his favorite passage in the Bible, he's, oh, they're all good.
No,
The
all
Bible
of
has
it. I
the
like
best
all of it.
passages.
Yeah.
He's not a committed Christian.
Mhm.
You know, he claims now that through the efforts of various evangelical leaders who have come to the White House and
Oh
laid
no, he
hands
hasn't said this.
that he has, seen the. But it's hard to kind of
Right.
really
Well,
Take him
rationalize
seriously.
that.
at some point,
So,
I would love to get an idea from you. In an ideal situation, what would be the criteria that a president would have to meet for a Christian to be morally justified in supporting them? The base criteria they would have to meet.
But just in your view,
again,
obviously, yeah.
In your view,
yeah, that's
obviously.
in my own personal view.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think, well, frankly, I can answer that one. I have thought about it. I happen to believe that, and I'm not alone in this. Actually, there's a book I have here, which there's two books I wanted to mention. One of them is a book called Dominion by Tom Holland. I know I'm not supposed to plug anybody else's book while my own is out there,
That's okay.
but Tom
Well,
Holland is a brilliant.
there's a whole bunch of other people's works. There's some also really great fiction, dystopian fiction that you can plug at some point if you're
Oh
interested
yeah,
in doing that. But we'll get
I heard of this guy who does that on the side. Although I don't know which is the side and which is real, Nick. You'll have to explain that. Yeah, for those, I'll just say it. For those who don't know, look up Nick Soutter on Amazon. He's got 3 that I know of. Right, very interesting sounding. I have to confess, I haven't read them yet. Very interesting sounding fiction books.
well, thank you. So you were saying?
So in this book, Tom Holland, and I'm sure Misha knows him or knows of him at least. He's a British historian. Talks about he's not a Christian, but he does talk about the idea that the values that we consider Western moral values, like people having rights,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and born with certain inalienable rights. These Holland makes the case that these were not values that and equality of people and not hurting people, just basic stuff that we all take for granted. He makes the case that the origin of these values came from Christianity. And what he said, I heard him do a wonderful discussion with N.T. Wright, the theologian, on the Justin Brierley show, Unbelievable. It was a couple of years ago. And what Holland said was, if you were living in the Roman Empire and you said, I'm a victim, my group is being victimized, that's not good, the reaction would be, oh, you're a victim? Good, then we'll kill you and use you, take you as slaves. I mean, there was the whole concept of fairness and justice and all of that stuff. Holland makes the case that this is directly traceable originally to Christian values, and of course it's spread throughout the continent and beyond. I just want to say one other thing, which I wanted to say earlier about, and this is another book which came out about a year ago, maybe, or at least 8 months ago, and it's by a theologian named Jim Wallace. It's called Christ in Crisis. Christ in Crisis. It's a book that kind of it predates, obviously, the Christianity Today editorial that we were talking about. But the whole book is about this crisis of moral values in American Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
and how we need to get back to what really counts. He quotes Jesus saying, Jesus says, "Be not afraid," and then he said, then Wallace says, when leadership becomes utterly defined by power and by winning and losing, Jesus says leadership is about service and washing each other's feet. And I can't come up with a better answer to you, Ansgar, about what we would want in a leader than that. Uh, one of the most emotional moments I've had in watching any politician was when our previous president, Barack Obama, went to the church where a massacre had taken place. You may remember that.
Yeah.
In a black church. And nobody knew what he was going to say. And he just started singing Amazing Grace. I don't know if you remember that. He sang Amazing Grace alone on TV to the entire world. That's leadership.
Well,
in a Christian
yeah, you're gonna make me cry. I miss that guy, and I miss him terribly. Got to be in the same room with him a couple times, which was nice. Didn't actually get to meet him per se, but I was in very close proximity a couple of times. He's a great guy. He just gave me a wave, which is nice. That's the closest I can say. Obama wave.
So did I. Now that I think about it.
By the way,
he came to NIH, and I was working at NIH, and he gave a talk, and I was in the room, not far away.
Yeah.
Your description of a good leader, by the way, reminds me very much of what is described as a good leader in the Tao Te Ching, which the ultimate apparently leader is one that nobody even knows exists because they're not there to take credit. They're there simply to help.
Yeah. Well, I don't think this is rare wisdom, and Jesus Christ gave it to the world in a way that was eventually going to spread, pretty far. Unfortunately, as Jim Wallace in this book says, we're kind of losing that. We're losing the whole concept of what we see as important in our leaders, and we need to get that back. And it doesn't have to be. I mean, Barack Obama was a Democrat, somewhat liberal. This person could be a conservative. I mean, one person who, what's interesting to me, I guess you guys know this well, is that Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama were all fairly good friends. They actually have been close to each other, especially Clinton and Bush, and a lot of that is based on their mutual Christianity, their mutual deep values. Now, I'm not saying which one of those was a better president, but that kind of common ground and moral values is, and not, of course, that Clinton was a paragon of moral values, but at least theologically and in terms of his belief system, he had that common ground with actually all the presidents. And as I said, if you think about it, the only exception I can think of is our current president.
Who is also, he seems to me to be almost loathed by the former presidents, and I think the leaders I most respect, including but not limited to John McCain, who I am
tremendous
a liberal, but
respect.
he's one.
Yeah,
I'd have voted for him. I mean, when he was running against Gore, I was like, he's one of the ones I always really liked John McCain.
There was a moment with John McCain that I think was staggering to me, and it's kind of touching. It really showed his integrity, and it was when he was campaigning and people were throwing out the birther crap. He shut it down and said no.
Right.
He was an American. I respect him. We have some disagreements politically, but this is, you're not going to spread that. And that was just a moment of integrity that showed his character to me.
Right. Yeah, there's no question about that. And I think, that's a whole nother topic, but the whole way that Trump treated McCain
oh Jesus
and his prisoner of war record was something that I'm in that generation, and that was something that really got me.
And for the record on this, because that one got me too, John McCain's patriotism was so above reproach that it's offensive to even and because here's the thing that some people know and some people don't, everybody knows for the most part that he was shot down in Vietnam. So he went there and he fought and he was shot down, but his father was an admiral. And when the VC learned of this, so he was being tortured, he was a prisoner of war, they were torturing him, they were breaking his bones, they were cutting into his flesh. And when they learned that he was the son of an admiral, they did the opposite of what you'd expect. You'd think maybe, oh, hey, wow, we got to. No, they decided to release him. And they decided to release him because they did not want to have that burden and have the kind of heat that could bring on. And they thought it might win at least a little sort of sympathy from the other side. He refused to leave. He refused to leave because he wasn't going to leave the other people who were being tortured behind for no other reason than his father was an admiral.
Yeah.
He refused to accept that charity as he was being tortured. That I found that phenomenally offensive, actually, in my mind, to the dignity of this country when somebody questioned McCain on that. You can question him on a lot of fronts. I certainly did. I got no problem doing it. But on that one, no.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much. I think Ansgar, was there anything else that you sort of wanted to cover here?
No, I think that about covers it. It was a very, very stimulating conversation. Thank you. I feel privileged to have had it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, this is a great channel. I urge everyone to, subscribe, hit notifications, etc. It's not just the discussions that you have with people, but it's also the breaking news. So I'm just putting in a plug for you guys. This is the up and coming channel. So.
Thank you very much.
Seriously.
We're very proud, and we have a lot of people. It's not just Ansgar and I. We have a lot of people working very hard to help us.
Absolutely.
And and we're very proud of the work we have done. And we appreciate you coming on. And it took way too long, and we look forward to having you on again very soon. And so until then.
Something without politics, please.
Yes.
Like I said, the debate. I was looking forward to taking you down, but you're on my side, so we're gonna get me shut for that one.
Pineapple is great.
So we're thank you so much for coming on. For those of you who are our Patreon hangout is tomorrow. I think it's 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. We look forward to doing that. My hope is we can do that. I'm at this point willing to bet $50 that something huge is going to happen right in the middle. We're like, sorry guys, we got to bail. But we're looking forward to the Patreon hangout. Patreon at any level. Mods have been dropping the links. It's also in the description. We're also going to update the description links with Dr. Sy Garte's book and the references to the organizations that he mentioned. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Garte, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all. Actually, we're done for the week on scheduled shows, unless we can reschedule the one with Red's Rhetoric. But we're ostensibly done for the week. I'm sure we will be seeing you guys in about 6 minutes when Trump does something fun. But until then, see you guys tomorrow for the Patreon hangout. Thank you, Dr. Garte, and we'll see you all later.
See ya.
Bye-bye.